let's do this. Okay, so we are recording now. So yeah, so welcome everyone to Torah and Tea. I was gonna go straight to, last week we spoke about Miriam and Moshe's sister, Moses' sister, and this week I was gonna go straight to Ruth because that's connected to Shavuot, the next holiday that's coming up. But then after last class, I'm talking about Miriam, I was really kind of inspired to be like, what do we know about Ztiporah? Because I said we know very little about her, and I wanted to just understand a little bit more of her character, a little bit of what we know about her. And so I did some research and I decided it should be short, so I'm hoping that we could do Ztiporah and Ruth. If not, we'll do Ztiporah and some of Ruth. But I thought that it would be really fun to do some of Ztiporah today. And I also made a big mistake in what I said last week in class. So I'm going to own up to that mistake, and I'm going to correct it in this class when I talk about, when we learn about Ztiporah, because I said a story wrong, and I would like to correct that, which actually, if for those of you that were there, my mother-in-law kind of like chimed in and helped out with that story, but I just want to like really go into that a little bit more to correct that. So my mother-in-law did correct it as I was saying it, but we're going to go into that. And just before we get started on Ztiporah, I thought I'll do today's, we're in the middle of counting the Omer, right? 49 days from Passover to Shavuot. And it's not just counting the days because we're so excited to receive the Torah, which is a huge part of it, but it's also personal refinement, right? So every single day has a different character trait or a mixture of character traits that we're working on, and we're really like refining ourselves, our neshama, our souls, so that we're ready to receive the Torah in that way. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to mute everyone, so I'm just going to do that. And then you're all welcome to unmute yourselves at any point. Okay, so today is the 19th day of the Omer, so it's week 3, day 5. And today is 19 days, which are 2 weeks and 5 days of the counting of the Omer. And the combination is Hod of Tiferet, which is humility within compassion. So if compassion, so this is humility within your compassion. So what does that look like? So if compassion is not to be condescending and pretentious, it must include humility. I think that's really interesting, that compassion, you know, could be like a condescending kind of compassion or pretentious kind of compassion. But in order to keep that out of the mix, it has to have humility in it. So Hod, which is humility, is recognizing that my ability to be compassionate and giving does not make me better than the recipient. It is the acknowledgement and appreciation that by creating one who needs compassion, God gave me the gift of being able to bestow compassion. Thus, there is no place for haughtiness in compassion. So the questions we ask ourselves, do I feel superior because I am compassionate? Do I look down at those who need my compassion? Am I humble and thankful to God for giving me the ability to have compassion for others? And the exercise express compassion in an anonymous fashion without taking any personal credit. I think that's interesting to think about and focus on for today. Okay, so I am in the handout. We're going to start off with Ztiporah. So I have my handout of Ztiporah. If you have that with you, great. If not, no problem. You could follow along. You could just open it up on your computer if you want. There's a link to it in today's handout and today's email, Sunday's email, I think even Friday's email. Okay, so, all right. So Ztiporah, so why, okay, so we're gonna just kind of go a little bit into who she was, right? So Ztiporah is the wife of Moses. So when Moses was 17 years old, he was in Egypt, right? And he sees an Egyptian, he sees an Egyptian killing a Jew, beating a Jew, and so he kills the Egyptian. And the next day, and then he like buries him in the sand, and he's like worried, like I hope no one, hears about what I just did. And then the next day, he sees a Jew and another Jew fighting, and he tells them that you can't, lifting their hand to like hurt the other one or whatever, and he tells them to stop. And one of them says, "Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" So Moses realizes that, that the secret is known, and he's worried that Pharaoh is going to come and kill him. So he runs away to Midian. And in Midian is where he meets his wife, Ztiporah. Okay, so this is where we're going to like enter in Ztiporah into Moses' life. He only comes back to Egypt, by the way, when he's 80. All right, so these years of his life, from 17 to 80, is when he's gone, which is a very long time. So there's a lot that we can go on that happened there. He became the general of an army of Edom, and then he became the king there, right? There's like a whole bunch of stuff that happened in that time that he's gone that the Torah doesn't tell us straight out in those verses. But we're going to take this back to his time in Midian and Ztiporah. So question number 1 on the handout is, she's described as a Cushite. Okay, the verse that talks, when we talks about Ztiporah, says that she was a Cushite. And last week we spoke about a Cushite is a dark-skinned person. Now the question, and so this is one of the mistakes I made, is that I said that, the question is, why was she described as a Cushite when she's a Midianite? Moses went to Midian, that's where he met Ztiporah. She was the daughter of Yitro. Her father-in-law was Yitro, who number 1 was a previous advisor to Pharaoh in Egypt, and he had to leave because he got on Pharaoh's bad side. And then in Midian, he was a big leader in Midian, but then when he gave up idol worship, and he was like really not agreeing with all the idol worship, he was really taken to the ways of the Jews, and he ended up converting. He was like really, what's the word, like downgraded in Midian. Okay, so he's like, look, his position was kind of taken away from him, and then he had 7 daughters, and his daughters were not anymore considered like Midianite princesses like they were when Yisro was in charge there, but they were kind of looked down upon, which we're going to talk about that there. But just to go back, so Ztiporah is one of Yisro's daughters, and the Talmud tells us in text number 1 that the Cushites historically were a dark-skinned people. A dark-skinned woman is a rare visage in the Torah, and thus the Torah is metaphorically describing that Ztiporah was unusual in her deeds. Okay, so in other words, there is an opinion that when it says that she was a Cushite, she's not a Cushite, she's a Midianite, and that she's not actually dark-skinned. There is an opinion that she is, but according to this opinion, it's saying that she's like just as much as someone who's dark-skinned is dark-skinned, like it, like let's say if they have black skin, they have black skin. Her deeds were so like rare and unusual in a beautiful way, right? Like kind of like if someone was like, just as I know the color is black, I know that you're a fabulous person, right? Like that kind of comparison. So it's like the Torah is calling her a Cushite, like just as I know that a Cushite is dark-skinned, I know that Ztiporah is unusual in her deeds, okay? Or like in text number 2, commentaries explain that just as a dark-skinned person is immediately noticeable, so too an individual described as a Cushite possesses a character that is obvious and clear to all, right? So then the question is, what is so great about Ztiporah? And the Talmud continues to tell us in text 3, she was exceptionally modest and unassuming in her actions. Okay, so now we're getting like a little bit more of an idea of Ztiporah. I think that in the same way that Miriam was like an exceptional person, but she had the bold and fiery and fierce nature to her in her exceptionality, if that's even a word, right? So Ztiporah, here we see it like a different way of her being described. She was exceptionally modest and unassuming in her actions, which could also contribute to why we don't know that much about her, perhaps. And text number 4 tells us about her also from the Shalah, that alternatively, she was capable of transforming the physical into spiritual and darkness into light. Okay, so just like something kind of, she was clearly a special woman. And then what about her name? What does Ztiporah mean? So text number 5, the Midrash Rabbah tells us that Ztiporah literally means bird, right? I don't know if you guys ever heard that, right? But in Hebrew, a tzipor is a bird. Ztiporah literally means bird. And just as the blood of a bird purifies a home that is covered in leprosy, this is talking about part of like the process that had to be done when someone had leprosy, which is we don't have nowadays, but it is a physical manifestation, an illness that's physically manifested but comes from a spiritual illness. Ztiporah cleansed her father's home from idols. So there's kind of like this cleansing concept that, oh, Robin, Ztiporah is her Jewish name. I love that. Okay, yay, we have a Ztiporah. Do we have any other Ztiporahs, by the way? Any other Ztiporahs here? Or just Robin? Okay, I love that, because last week we had, when we spoke about Miriam, we had 3 Miriams in the room. So I love that we have a Ztiporah in the room. All right, so now you're going to learn more about your namesake. So text number 6, Midrash Tanchuma tells us that alternatively...
Wait, Adina, a comment. Yes. It's kind of ironic that it's the blood of the Ztiporah that is used to cleanse the tzarat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Miriam was afflicted with when she spoke ill of her.
Yeah.
It's just funny juxtaposition.
It is. I thought of that also when I was preparing this class. I'm like, that is so interesting. Although it does say, and I don't know all the details, but it's so when someone has tzarat, it could be on your body, it could be on your clothing, and it could be on your house, and there's different levels. So this, it says it cleanses on the house, but that's just like one little distinction. But you're right. I think that is very interesting. One of the daughters of Phil on the roof, Tavia calls her Little Bird. Is her name Ztiporah? Calls her Little Bird? Could be. Yeah. Okay. So alternatively, just as a bird is admired for its beauty, so was Ztiporah admired for her loveliness. Okay. So now we kind of put together again a little bit of a image of Ztiporah. Now, as I told you, we're gonna go into some very fascinating stories, but the Yisro, because he gave up his idol worship, he was like demoted in status in Midian. And because of that, his daughters had to be the ones to go to the well, I guess maybe before he had, other people working for him or something, but he didn't have any sons, and his daughters had to be the ones to go to the well and get water for the sheep and kind of like be the shepherds, okay? And I guess combination of him not having sons and the fact that maybe no one else would work for him because he worshipped idols. Because he stopped worshiping idols and he stopped being like the prince of Midian. Okay, so how Moses met Ztiporah. So some very fascinating stories. Does anyone want to read story number 1 for us? Can I call on you, Jolie, to do that?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Ztiporah, Yitro's daughter, was famous for her fine character and beauty. In Midian, where she lived with her father and 6 sisters, people often talked of Ztiporah's kindness and wisdom. Many were the princes who came to Yitro seeking the hand of his daughter in marriage. To all suitors, Yitro had but one answer. In my garden there grows a wonderful staff. If your royal highness will get it out of the ground, Ztiporah will be yours. Eagerly the suitor would go into the garden and up to that wonderful staff, glittering in the sun with a million colors and hues. His first attempt to pull the staff out of the ground would bring no results. Again and again he would try to pull at the staff with all his might, but to no avail. The staff simply would not be dislodged from the ground. Thus the princes came hopefully and left abashed and mystified. Ztiporah would often go into the garden, admire the wonderful staff, and wonder who her husband would be. But how did this wonderful staff come to be there? Well, it's quite a story. The staff was as old as the world itself. When God created the world, he created that wonderful staff out of pure sapphire. On it were engraved the Hebrew letters of God's name and 10 other mysterious letters. God gave this staff to Adam to walk with it in the Garden of Eden. Later, it turned up in the hands of the pious Noah, and he passed it on to Shem. Shem passed it on to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Shem passed it on to Abraham. Isaac and Jacob treasured it greatly, and before Jacob died in Egypt, he gave it to Joseph. When Joseph died, Yitro, who was one of Pharaoh's chief counselors, took it. Returning to Midian, Yitro planted it in his garden, and there it stuck in the ground, and nobody could get it out again. You want me to keep reading?
Yeah.
Okay. When Moses fled from Egypt and finally found refuge in Midian in the house of Yitro, he took a walk in the garden and saw the divine staff. He barely touched it when the staff almost jumped out of the ground. There he was, holding the divine staff, and he brought it into the house. Yitro knew then that Moses was a godly man. He offered him to become his son-in-law, and Moses gladly agreed. It was with this divine staff that Moses later performed all the miracles in Egypt at God's command. With this staff, too, Moses split the Red Sea and brought water out of the rock. The divine staff will turn up again in the hands of Moshiach, a descendant of David, who will once again perform wonderful miracles with it at God's command when the hour of Israel's complete redemption will come. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, fascinating, right? Okay, so this is from the Midrash about this fascinating, right, staff that was from beginning of creation and how it got handed down and then ended up all the way in Yisro's garden. And Moses was the one who was able to like pull it out of the ground, and therefore he merited Ztiporah's hand in marriage. Now, I actually would take story number 2 and story number 1 and flip it. That story number 2 happened first, because these are okay. So I was like trying to piece it together and see like how, if all of these stories like occurred, then how could they all occur? So we're going to go to story number 2, but it must have happened first in order for story number 1 to have occurred. Okay, so do you want to read that for us, Tessa? Oh, hold on, let me unmute you. You might have to unmute yourself. Hold on one second, Tessa. We don't hear you.
All you have to do is touch the space bar to unmute yourself.
All right. Tessa, could you unmute yourself? Because it's not working for me to do it for you.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, let me pull it up now. Oh my goodness. Okay, story 2. Scripture describes how, after Moses protected Yithro's daughters from shepherds who did not allow them to access the local well, Yithro gave his daughter Ztiporah to Moses. The Midrash provides a fascinating backstory of how this union came to be. When Moses showed up in Midian and admitted to Yithro that he was fleeing from Pharaoh, Yithro, who was an advisor to Pharaoh at the time, threw him into a pit and left him there to die of starvation. Ztiporah had compassion on Moses and brought him bread and water. After 10 years, she turned to her father and said, "This Hebrew has been jailed in the pit for the past 10 years. Nobody has come around asking for him. Hence, he's no longer dangerous to have him in our home. If it is good in your eyes, Father, let us send for him and see if he's alive or dead." Yithro hadn't known of his daughter's kindness to Moses, so he was quite shocked. Is it possible for a man to be locked up for 10 years and survive without food? His daughter replied, "Father, haven't you heard that the God of the Hebrews is great and awesome and does miracles for them all the time? He saved Abraham from the fire, Isaac from the sword, and Jacob from the angel who fought him. And how about this very Moses who was saved from the Nile and from the sword of Pharaoh? I am sure that God could have saved him now as well." Indeed, they went to the pit and found Moses alive, standing and praying to the God of his fathers. He was taken out, cleaned, given a haircut, and brought to the family table for a meal. It was then that Moses asked for Zipporah's hand in marriage. She had kept him alive and had shown him great kindness.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, first of all, just welcome to Diane and Vivian. Good to see you both. So glad you're both here. Okay, so this is like really fascinating that, okay, so here's what the Torah tells us in the verses of how Moses met Ztiporah, right? He flees Egypt, he comes to Midian, he goes to the well. He sees the daughters of Yithro there with their sheep. He sees the other shepherds kind of like keeping them from getting the water or like not treating them properly. He goes to the well, he gets them water. It actually, we learned that the water like rose up to him. What the commentary tells, similar to what happened to Rivka by the well, but that's not essential to the story. But anyways, he helps them out. And so then they go home and they're home earlier than usual. And Yithro says like, "Why are you home early today?" And they say, "There was this man by the well and he helped us and he got us the water." And Yithro says like, "Go get him and bring him home and, you know, like bring him home to us." And then Moshe, and we know that Moshe and Zipporah end up getting married. So, right. So now if we fit in these stories from the Midrash, like how could all of these have happened then? Could be that Moshe, he came home to Yithro, but then when he tells Yithro about his about the fact that he's like, why is he there? He's running away from Paro because he's scared that Paro is going to kill him. Then Yisro's like, this is going to put all of us in danger, throws him into the pit. He's in this pit for 10 years, and Ztiporah is feeding him and taking care of him. Again, this shows us something about Ztiporah. And if you look at story number 3 on text number 7, when Moses first showed up in Yisro's home, Ztiporah felt a deep love for him. She asked her father to allow her to marry him, which he did. So clearly, Ztiporah was very impressed with Moshe. And anyway, she keeps him alive for these 10 years. And we saw that story of Yisro and Ztiporah and their exchange, and they go and they get him out of the pit. And then the story with the staff could have happened. In other words, like that's when Moshe took the staff out, and Yisro realized like his capabilities and that this is truly a special person. And then Moshe and Ztiporah got married. Okay, so I think that these like midrashic stories just add so much richness and detail and, you know, like fascinating stories to like the backstory behind everything. So I wanted to bring that up. Okay, so now another part of Ztiporah's character, her courageous act.
Can I read that one?
Yes, please.
Now he was on the way in an inn that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. This is of Moses. So Ztiporah took a sharp stone and severed her son's foreskin and cast it to his feet. Now the story behind this text, after Moses was informed by God that he would be the redeemer of the Jewish people, Moses, together with his wife and children, left the comfort of Midian to travel down to Egypt where the Jews were enslaved. This was a risky journey, which Ztiporah courageously joined. One night while they were staying in an inn, an angel of God came to kill Moses. And Ztiporah realized that he was being punished for not circumcising their newborn son, because Moses had delayed the Brit Milah due to the rigors of travel. Thus, with quick thinking, Ztiporah saved her husband's life by giving their son a Brit Milah. The leader and redeemer of the Jewish people was twice saved by this holy woman, as well as their son.
Yeah. So, thank you, Gail, for reading that for us. Okay, so this is like this fascinating story where they're traveling back. Moshe takes Ztiporah, and they have 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer. And they're traveling back to Egypt, and Moshe figured, because of this journey, I'm not going to give him a bris right now. I'm not going to circumcise him right now. I'll wait till the journey is over. But they stop, and they kind of stay in some kind of inn or some kind of lodging for the night, which means that that's when they could have done the bris. And Moshe still thought, like, I'm still going to wait. And so in the form of a snake, God sends in like an angel in the form of a snake to come and essentially to kill Moshe for his negligence, so to speak, in not keeping this mitzvah that was so important. So the snake kind of like ate him from the head down to his reproductive organ, like swallowed him, and then from his feet up to his reproductive organ. And Ztiporah like saw what was going on and realized right away that it was because of that they didn't give their son a bris. And so she right away took a sharp rock and she gave their son a bris and saved Moshe's life in that process. So again, this is fascinating, but also just tells us again something about Ztiporah's character. She, number one, saved Moshe's life and their son's life, right? But it's almost like, again, we owe, kind of like we say, like, the fact that we had Moses is because of Miriam, because Miriam like stood by, watched, took over him, made sure that they were going to like save him, and right. But also like, and then here because of Ztiporah, because of her, the son's name, Eliezer. They had 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer, and this was Eliezer that this happened to answer Elizabeth's question. So again, so I think it just sheds something, besides for being a fascinating addition to like this whole story that we're learning about in the Torah, but it tells us more about Ztiporah. Okay, but then what happens is, as Moses is nearing Egypt, he's greeted by his brother Aaron, who's like, basically tells him in text 9, like, what are you doing here? Why are you bringing your wife and your sons when Jewish people are suffering? And like, you don't need to add more people into the suffering or to witness it or anything. So he says, we're pained by those already here, and you bring more people to this terrible situation. So what they realize is, how about Ztiporah will go back with the 2 sons until this is all over, until Moses gets the Jews out, and then they're going to come back and rejoin. So Ztiporah and their 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer, travel back to their father's home in Midian. And she's not going to see her husband or the Jewish nation for more than a year, okay? Because it took a year, all the plagues, until after the Exodus, after the splitting of the sea, and according to some opinions, the giving of the Torah. Like that's where met back up with them. Okay, so because the next time we hear of Ztiporah, and again, the Torah is not a storybook, so we're not getting full chronological order. We're not getting all the details of everything, because really the Torah is a guide for our life, and every single thing that's in the Torah is because it actually relates to some practical message or lesson for us to live our lives today and every day throughout our life, right? So it's not, even though we're like, wait, this is fascinating and I want to hear more, it's actually not a history book. So we don't hear about Ztiporah until Yisro comes to join the Jewish people in the desert, and he comes with Ztiporah and their 2 sons. So the last time, which is like really fascinating if you think about the last time that Ztiporah and her 2 sons saw their husband and their father, Moses was just like a simple person, right? A private person, let's say. And the next time they come back to meet up with him, he's the leader of the Jewish people, like taking them out. Moses is the leader. And even that, I think, when I think about Ztiporah, like even that demands tremendous sacrifice, because if you just think about it, like she didn't marry him thinking I'm the wife of the Jewish leader, or this is what our life is going to look like, right? It was like this man that really impressed her, that she really saw was like someone special, someone holy, someone, right? But then what their life ended up being, and then we're going to kind of get into that a little bit more, is so different. And I think it's like sacrifice. It was sacrifice on Ztiporah's part. And again, we're going to get to even more where it's even more sacrifice than that. But I sometimes think, like, for example, the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, the Rebbe's wife, really was the one who encouraged him, because for an entire year after his father-in-law died, the Rebbe before him, he didn't take on the leadership. Everyone was like begging him and demanding and asking, and he was just like, my father-in-law is the Rebbe, like I'm not taking on this role. And his wife was the one who really encouraged him to do it. She said, like, the Hasidim don't have a leader, and like you need to you need to do this. But what she was doing was giving up her husband to a public role, to the point where he was gone for like days and nights, and like she would sometimes stay up till 3 a.m. until he came home from 770. She always stayed up till he would come home from a farbrengen. And like, just again, it's like tremendous self-sacrifice to almost like give up, right, like that private life. Or I mean, she was very, very, very private, but to give her husband to the public. And again, I kind of like, that just kind of what came to mind when I was thinking how Ztiporah really like gave her husband to the Jewish people in a certain sense. Okay. Okay, so text number 2, and this gets us to the story that I botched up last week, and I'm going to fix in today's class. So we have this story, text 10, we spoke about it last week. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Now, I said, like, they probably said like an off-the-cuff comment about either the fact that she was a convert or a Cushite, right? Like that she was dark-skinned or convert, and neither of that's the case. And that was me saying some lashon hara about Miriam. That's not what they were talking about. They were actually defending, Miriam was talking to Aaron, and Miriam was defending Ztiporah, and actually said something negative about Moses, okay? So, as Rashi tells us, it's right there. The woman in question, text 11, the woman in question was none other than Ztiporah. Not the woman that they're speaking badly about, but the woman that this is regarding. So what was happening? What were they saying? So the Torah continues to say they weren't talking about her, but about their brother Moshe. They said, has the Lord spoken only to Moshe? Hasn't he spoken to us too? Okay, so let me just tell you the backstory of this. Ztiporah is next to Miriam, and I guess Miriam is next to, Ztiporah is next to Miriam when Ztiporah's son, Gershom, right, they have 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. Gershom comes running to Ztiporah and says, Eldad and Medad are prophesizing in the camp, okay? It's another story, but these two men are prophesizing. And Ztiporah answers back, oh, you know what? This is already here for you. Okay, so what were they speaking about? So Rashi tells us that Moshe had divorced his wife, and in text 12, how did Miriam know that Moses had separated from his wife? So Reb Nassan says, Miriam was next to Ztiporah when Moshe was told that Eldad and Medad, who were newly appointed prophets, were prophesying in the camp. When Ztiporah heard this, she said, "Woe to their wives if they are required to prophecy, for they will separate from their wives, just as my husband separated from me." Okay, so Miriam hears this and is thinking, Moshe separated from his wife? Like, because she didn't know. So again, I spoke about this before, how actually in Judaism, marriage is so highly regarded, and it's not a requirement to separate from physical, from either intimate relationships or the physical world in order to achieve high levels of holiness. That is absolutely not a Jewish concept, even though it exists in other religions. But the only time we see it is here with Moses, that God told Moses that he needs to separate from his wife so that he can be available 24/7 for any time that God needs to speak to him. Okay? And so here, when Ztiporah hears about these two people prophesying, she kind of says, like, they might, kind of like, woe to them if they have to separate from their wives. And Miriam hears this and is thinking, Moshe separated from Ztiporah? And then she has this like thing, like, he spoke to me, like God spoke to me, God spoke to Aaron, like we're also prophets, but we didn't have to separate. So she kind of like, in defense of Ztiporah, speaks badly about Moshe to her brother Aaron. Okay, so nothing to do with the Cushite concept, the converting concept, nothing of that. She wasn't speaking anything badly about Ztiporah. Even just at the beginning of class, I said, like, we don't even know whether Cushite, when she said she's a Cushite, but really she's a Midianite, if that refers to like her deeds or whether she really was dark skinned. There's just different opinions on that. But either way, that's not what Miriam was talking about. She was saying, like, how could Moshe do this? And really, how could Moshe do this is because God had specifically told Moshe to do this. So because Miriam said that Lashon Hara, said that, like, spoke badly about Moshe, she was stricken with leprosy, and then she was had to go quarantined. She was quarantined, shelter in place for 7 days until she could rejoin the Jewish people. Okay. So, and that kind of is how we end the class right here, right? So in truth, however, it was only Moses who was required to separate from his wife in order to be constantly on call, ready to speak to God at any moment. So other prophets remained married, led normal family lives. This was a very specific connection. There's a really strong message here about the role of strong women standing beside the men in their lives. It's as if the men didn't know their greatness or even ask to be leaders. Yeah, I love that. I love what Maddie just added in the chat. I totally agree with you. In the end, Ztiporah made the ultimate sacrifice. Unlike every other prophet, her husband had, so this is really the ultimate sacrifice. Like, yes, she, saved her husband's life in that moment when she saw what was going on and she circumcised her son. But this was truly her ultimate sacrifice. She realized my husband has to be in constant communication with God, and it didn't leave room for anything else in his life. And it was thanks to her kindness, her courage, her sacrifice that the Jewish people were gifted with the eternal leadership and influence of our greatest teacher, Moshe. So this is, like I said, we know little about Ztiporah, but now I, and hopefully you know more because of this, because really I was like, I just need to find out whatever I could about Ztiporah, because I'm fascinated by all the women in Torah and in history. Okay, so does anybody have any questions on that before we get into talking about Ruth? Anyone have anything?
I was wondering if Moshe was labeled one of the most modest man.
Yeah.
So in the telling of the story about Ztiporah, it said that Ztiporah was also modest. So is there any writing about it, or to your knowledge, anything about the fact that Ztiporah also affected Moshe with her modesty, and so they became a couple and he took on the modesty that she felt? Mm-hmm. Or was it just that he was a modest man?
Yeah, so there's a verse in the Torah that Moses was the most humble man on the face of the earth, right? Which is a very powerful statement, right? Very, very powerful. And we see it so many times. God is like, you're going to go and you're going to take out, the Jewish people. And he's like, what, me? Like, ask my brother. Like, I can't even speak properly. I have a stutter. Like, he's just totally, like, very, very, very unassuming over and over and over in the Torah, which is fascinating. I don't think there's a specific text saying that, like, Ztiporah kind of influenced Moshe in that way, but there are very specific texts, the ones that you have right here in front of you, about her, right? That she's exceptionally modest and unassuming in her actions, or that she was unusual in her deeds, or like things like that. And I mean, I think that sometimes opposites attract, but sometimes like attracts like. And it could be that their strong traits of humility and modesty were just really attractive to each other. Yeah. That's what I see.
Thank you.
I see there.
I have a quick question, Adina, about the word modest.
Yes.
In text 3, when it said she was exceptionally modest and unassuming in her actions, is this written in the Torah or Talmud only?
Talmud.
Okay, and what is the Hebrew word for modest? What is that? Can we unpack that word a little bit, because I don't really understand it.
Yeah, so actually in this scenario, I didn't look up this quote. I don't have in the original Hebrew, so it's hard for me to give you the word here. Now, usually the word modest. So if it's the same word, right? In the word that we use for Jewish modesty, usually referring to how we talk, we speak, we act, we dress, is tzniut. Okay, Tzniut, tzniut, or tznius. Okay, is the Hebrew word. So in the Torah, there's a verse, Hatzneya lechet im havaya elokecha. Hatzneya, coming from the same root of, is like the same form, same conjugation of the word tzniut, which means walk discreetly with God your God. So it's like discreetness, modesty, unassuming. I don't know, like we kind of almost use like a lot of English words sometimes to describe one Hebrew word, because it's hard to, right, like to package, like what is tzniut, right? So tzniut is this concept of being discreet, being unassuming, being modest. If you put all three of those together, what might that look like when you're trying to be maybe discreet about your actions, or discreet about your generosity, right? If you're trying to be like hatzneya, tzniut in your generosity, it might mean, for example, like a huge philanthropist will do the philanthropy without, wanting a lot of publicity and PR and their name everywhere or whatever because of that, right? So that could be like what their tzniut would look like in that sense. What would it look like in the sense of a woman's dress, right? The Torah tells us women and men have dress code, but it's different for each, right? So like for a woman, what might a modest dress be, right? And then we have certain guidelines covering our necklines and our elbows and our collarbones and our elbows, our knees, right? Like what is a modest way of dressing? With our language, again, that I don't know if there's like, it's not necessarily black or white, but perhaps not using, vulgar words and curse words or things like that. Or again, even just lashon hara could be, right? Like just the way we talk, using a softer tone. Does that kind of answer your question?
It kind of does, but it opens up a little bit, just a tiny more question. I don't want to take a ton of time.
No problem.
But my concern about the word modesty is that it's a blanket kind of a word. And I think in this instance, it means something, it doesn't have to do with dress. I think that that's another application of the word.
Right. Yeah.
But I think
it's the opposite. I don't think it's a blanket. It's like a very broad word. Right?
Yeah, it's a broad word, but I think in this instance, it means a lack of conceit, a lack of arrogance, or a lack of self-promotion, because in Judaism, being unassuming is not necessarily what we're going for.
Yeah.
And not speaking up is the opposite of what we're going for. So I think it's an important separation, important distinction between the word. I just really need to understand a little more deeply. So I appreciate.
Yeah. No. That's fantastic. I think you're totally right, especially the way it says here. She was exceptionally modest and unassuming in her actions, right? So like when I think of that, it's like, for example, let's just say like the story with Moses, and then I'll get to your question in a second, Maddie. But let's say with Moses, right, when Ztiporah saw what was going on here and that Moshe's life was in danger, and she just like took the rock and, gave her son a circumcision and saved her husband's life. It's like, imagine someone's like, oh my gosh, you're amazing and you're fearless and look what you did. Like, and to her, it's like, no, like, that's just what had to be done, right? Like, that's kind of like being unassuming in your actions. Like, I don't need the pomp. I don't need the, right? Like lack of arrogance, lack of conceit. It's almost like you just do the right thing because you need to, or like what, like that kind of concept. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah. There? Yeah. It's different. And it's a little more expanded. I appreciate that.
So modest, exactly. So that's why when you talk about the word tzniut or hatzneya lecha im havaya elokecha, walk discreetly with God your God, it is very broad. It is not very specific, right? So, for example, when people hear the word tzniut in Judaism, a lot of times they right away go to the dress, and I always say that mitzvah encompasses how we think, how we act, how we talk, how we show up. It's our entire demeanor. Dress is one piece of it, right? So modesty, I think, is like a broad topic, and then there's so much in that, and it's not so black and white. There are maybe some areas that are black and white, but so much of it is like our own sensitivities to things, where that kind of goes into. So Gail, let me get to you in a second. Let me just see. Madeline said, okay, Maddie said, what is the difference between humility in this case and lack of confidence or belief in himself, which is why I believe Ztiporah was meant for him, to give him that confidence. Okay, so I think that humility doesn't equal low self-esteem. It doesn't equal low self-confidence. If anything, the opposite. Gail, you're sharing your screen with us. Let me see if I know how to undo that. Or if you know how to undo that. Stop participant sharing. There we go. Okay, so it's not, humility doesn't mean lack of self-esteem or lack of self-confidence. Humility is usually this combination of like, I know my worth or I know my talents, but it's not because of me. It's because of God, right? So like someone could say like, I'm a fantastic speaker, right? Because God gifted me with that ability, not because I'm great and phenomenal and I made myself this way. Right? So there's kind of a difference like between arrogance and humility, but like humility and self-esteem and self-confidence can go together. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question there? Yes.
Does it have to do with ego?
Right. Like ego would be the opposite of would not be humility, right? Ego is like, I did this, right? So for example, like the phrase in Hebrew, it's like kochem be'etzem yadi, like this was done by my strength and the strength of my hands. Like I accomplished this. And again, we can do that in all, right? If we're talented in something, we could be like, look at me, like look how talented, like, or if someone has a large, financial estate, they could be like, look what I've created, versus like, I'm so grateful to have this and that God allowed this abundant blessing in my life. And like, yes, I made the vessel for it by, making, doing this work or doing these investments, but it's not like because of me, because I'm so great, because I'm like this self-contained piece of wonder or something like that. Okay. Let's see.
You are a self-contained piece of wonder.
Thank you, Jolie. Okay, that cracked me up, that sentence that I just said. Okay, Gail, did you have a question?
Yes, I never really have heard of Moses the prophet. Could you talk a little bit about the prophecies that he's done?
Yeah, Moses was prophesying all the time. Everything he did was he was, I think, the greatest prophet. So even just like, he had direct communication with God, and it was even considered called face-to-face communication. There's like there's different terms in Torah of God communicating with people in different ways, and Moses had whatever that looked like, face-to-face, voice-to-voice communication. So God was constantly telling him what to do, versus there's other kinds of prophecy where it's like it came to people, they were known as a prophet, but it came to them like in a dream. It was like a trance-like state or a vision-like state, or some other way that then they were able to transmit that to the Jewish people. Moses, it was like direct speech from God. I mean, I like everything that was like all the plagues, right? All the, like, here's what's going to be, and here's what's, so much of what Moses said and did is all prophecy. But I think that maybe it's just different because we're like, oh, but it's direct communication, right? Which is just like the highest form of prophecy. And Adrian, you also had your hand raised, right?
Right. I had a question about the beginning of the story. It seems a little odd that God doesn't recognize Moses and Ztiporah. What are they trying to say by that?
That God doesn't recognize them?
Yeah, because the child isn't circumcised. What does it mean to imply by that? Because of course God knew who they were and what they were, the meaning of their lives already.
Okay, so let me just go back to that story. Where do you see that he didn't recognize him?
It's the same place. It's the place where she circumcises her child with a rock.
Yeah. So in the verse it says he was on the way in an inn that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death.
Yeah, why? I mean, that seems odd.
Why did God want to put him to death?
Yes. Seems like more than a gentle reminder. I mean, it seems like it's about something else.
Okay. So your question is like, why is this so harsh?
Yeah.
Well, he was negligent. Moses was like knew that he had to keep this mitzvah, which we're going to anyways talk. In Ruth, we're going to talk about this concept of keeping mitzvah before they were given. And God's like, this is the leader that I'm choosing and have chosen to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And he knows that he's supposed to give this circumcision to his son, and he doesn't. Now, here's the thing. It's like he sought to put him to death, but he didn't, right? Like, in other words, God sees the whole, like, in that moment, it's not like God was going to kill him, and then Ztiporah intervened, and then God changed his mind. Like, okay, I'm not saying this right. It's like, this was always the plan, right? If like God has the plan for the world, the plan was like, Moses didn't do this. So he's like, this was negligent, right? You were supposed to give your son a bris, and sends this angel, right? But like, of course, in like the all-knowingness, this was going to happen, that he wasn't going to be put to death because he was going to be the redeemer of the Jewish people. So I think that like the point here more is like, yes, the severity, so to speak, of his negligence, his wife stepping in, like the ability for, and I think also this might speak to the fact that we said like righteous people are judged at a different level than the rest of us, right? So like, it could seem like very harsh, but like for the level that Moses was on and the relationship he had with God, right? He already spoke to him at the burning bush. Like that wasn't harsh, so to speak, even though it didn't even happen. If that makes sense.
Kind of.
Yes, we're like, we would just like it if it said that God gave him a gentle nudge and was like, by the way, circumcise your son.
Adina, if I may.
Yes.
So if first of all, it's midrash. It's not in Torah, but it's such a.
No, that's straight from the Torah. That verse.
Oh, pardon me.
Yeah.
This God sending the snake with the breed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I remember.
No,
okay.
sorry, not the snake part. The verse. No. Sorry. The
verse part about Ztiporah circumcising her son is in Torah.
Thought to put this exactly these words. Text number 8. Those are the words that are exactly from the Chumash, right? Now he was on the way in an inn that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. And then the next sentence, so Ztiporah took a sharp stone and severed her son's foreskin and cast it to his feet. Like, in other words, what happened here? Right.
So my point is that if God could be so upset and even think about such a punishment for Moses, who's the favorite, so to speak, the prophet, I mean, who's going to redeem all the people.
Yeah.
How much the more so would God be? God would also be upset with humanity if they didn't follow the mitzvot. It's like what is that? Kal v'chomer.
Kal v'chomer, right? How much more? So?
Yeah. It's.
But it should be less since we're lesser.
Right, and I was gonna say the other thing is you could look at it the opposite of like he's so upset because Moses is on such a high level that like of course Moses would know exactly what he needs to do there versus like, people like me, he's like, I get it, you're not.
But he did get upset a few times. Remember the flood.
Right. So I'm just saying you could use that thinking either way, but like I would only use that thinking anyways to help us, like to be like, yeah, God actually really cares about our actions and the things we do.
Absolutely. That's the way I was looking at that. If God, to us, it might not seem like such a big deal in today's modern world and the way some people think about circumcision. Not that I agree with that at all. However, so if somebody would say, well, you see, it's not such a big deal. Moses wasn't even going to do it to his child. It's a real learning tool.
Yeah.
Of how important Brit Milah is.
Yeah. It's huge. Brit Milah is huge.
Huge.
Yeah. Definitely one of the biggies.
And Moses, and what you were saying, Moses always did get punished more severely because of his position. He wasn't allowed to go into the land. I mean, such a harsh punishment. But with God's reasoning behind it. Even though we don't understand it, but for God, it was the right thing, it was the way to go.
Yeah. And Maddie brought up, like, maybe this was a test for Moses. Now, I don't know that we're ever told straight out that this was like one of his tests or anything like that, but definitely almost like Moses was on a different level. And so he had to be kind of like held to that standard. So whether or not it was a test, it was like, you are the one, right, who's going to be like transmitting Torah to the Jewish people, leading them out of Egypt, leading them through the desert, like the whole thing. So like, yes, you're the one who also needs to like know that when it's time to circumcise your son and go ahead and do that. So kind of like you were saying, Maddie said in the chat, like maybe also for him to understand his responsibility in the world, preparing him for his role to come. Like, yeah, it's definitely all could be connected. And then Naomi, you asked about the sources for the stories. Those are midrash.
But they just sound so hard to believe. They're both so.
Why? Which part?
I don't know. I don't know how to say it. I maybe just because they're new to me. I had never heard this whole 10 years in a pit and living on bread and water.
Ztiporah kept him alive.
Yeah. But I guess people did things like that, throw someone in a pit because he was being loyal. Yisro was being loyal to Pharaoh by trying to kill Moses, right?
I don't even know if it was loyal to Pharaoh, because at that point he wasn't on Pharaoh's good side either. I think it was maybe just fear for their lives. Like, this man is putting us all in danger. You're running away from someone who's going to come kill you, and you want us to harbor you, like us to have you here in our town, like that kind of thing. But they're fascinating stories.
And Midrash is Midrash, we're always supposed to believe it's true, or is it like more like a metaphor or an allegory or something?
So it's that's like a deeper question right there. Are we always supposed to believe it's true? Yeah, I believe that all of Torah is true. Now, whether my human brain can comprehend it or get it or understand it, not always. Like, and sometimes I'm like, does it mean it's in the literal sense? Does it mean it's not? Is there something different here? But I think that our job anyways is not about whether do I believe this or not, but like, what could this mean for me, or what could this teach me? Yeah. Versus like, right? I said to Menachem, like when I was going over these midrashes, I said something to Menachem because I was trying to see like, how could there be different versions of how Moshe married Ztiporah, right? Like it's either this or this or this. And then I figured out how they could all have happened, right? I just thought I put them in the wrong order. And I said to him, I said, isn't there like some phrase where like, if you believe the whole, all of midrash, you're a fool. And if you believe none of it, you're a heretic or something like that. And he's like, no, that's referring to, I don't know, stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, how could there be made up stuff and whatever? So I think that's like a bigger discussion, but I don't think it's my job when I learn pieces of Torah to decide like, this can't be just because my brain can't comprehend it. Right. Or just like, I'm just like, okay, like whether or not this can or can't be, this is what Torah is telling me. Now, what do I do with this piece of information? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my life? Or why would the Torah tell us? Or how does this fit into the whole thing? So I don't know if that quite answered your question.
No, it's not like an edited version is
but not on the literal level.
What's not on a literal level?
The midrash, maybe it is true, but it's not necessarily factual.
Or maybe it is, and our brains just can't comprehend that, right? The same way we're like, how could somebody have a baby when they're like 100 and whatever years old? But like our times are different.
Well, now we know how somebody could.
And so midrash is actually part of Torah then.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone have anything else before we go into Ruth?
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to get into Ruth now. Okay. So this is fantastic. Let's go. If you have your handout on Ruth. Okay. Princess Ruth. So I'll give you a little background of the story, but really actually the text on your sheet kind of go through the story. So Ruth was a Moabite princess, okay, and living in the land of Moab. Actually, I wonder if instead of just telling you the story, we'll just go straight into it, because the texts really do, the texts really do go through the story, and then I can always like fill in the gaps. So, so we'll do it that way. Actually, on your handout, you have the story. Okay, never mind. We'll do what's on your handout. I can always fill in the gaps in between. So Adrian, do you want to read for us the introduction?
Oh. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Oh, I think you just muted me because I was unmuted.
Oh, we can hear you.
Thanks. Okay. Princess Ruth was raised in the pagan palace of the Moabite monarch, but she insisted on forfeiting opulence and luxury to join her destitute mother-in-law on a journey to the land of Israel and to unite with the religion and nation of the one God. Each of us is Ruth at times, forced to choose between comfort and ideals, expedience and conviction. This poignant episode provides the inspiration and tools to rise to the occasion and make wise decisions.
Thank you. Okay. Jody Berman, do you have the text in front of you? Do you want to read for us the summary of the story of Ruth?
His wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons left Bethlehem and went to the land of Moab, seeing a severe famine that had stricken Israel, fleeing a severe famine that had stricken Israel. Elimelech died soon thereafter. His 2 sons married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. After 10 years, the sons both died destitute. Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, and her daughters-in-law elected to join her. Naomi, however, urged them to return to Moab. Orpah returned while Ruth continued with Naomi, determined to go with her and fully commit to Judaism. While gleaning wheat from the fields, Ruth met Boaz, a relative of Elimelech, who was eligible to redeem Ruth and perpetuate her husband's memory. Boaz invited Ruth to glean from his field for the remainder of the harvest. Nearing the end of the harvest, Ruth asked Boaz to marry her. Boaz agreed, provided that Ploni, a closer relative of Elimelech's, who had the first right of refusal, would waive his obligation. Ploni decided to marry, wait a second, I gotta move this.
Declined.
I just lost it, 1 sec.
I love your background.
Huh?
Yeah,
Your background is really fun.
Yeah. Where was that? Okay. Ploni declined to marry Ruth, fearing that marrying a Moabite would mar his heritage. Boaz married Ruth. The child she bore him was the grandfather of King David.
Okay. So thank you. So, and if that brings up a lot of questions for you, just that story alone, not to worry, because we're going to answer those things in our texts. So just before we continue, right? So we live in a day and age, I think, where probably one of the most valued ideals is freedom, right? Freedom of religion, freedom to say what we want, to marry who we want, to do the things we want, right? It's like this really huge ideal. And, you know, if we go back in time 200 years or 300 years or, you know, even less than that, right? We can go back to times where so many of the freedoms that we have today were not available to us and they were taken away from us. And then, but the question is, okay, what does Judaism have to say about freedom and choice? And so, like, yes, on the one hand, we are so grateful that we live in a society and in a time where freedom is so available to us and such a high ideal so that we can practice the way that we would like to. But it's actually not so simple, Judaism's view on all of this, okay? So we're coming up to the holiday of Shavuot. That's the next Jewish holiday. So it's like we got out of our Egyptian slavery where we did not have our freedoms, right? And then we got to Mount Sinai to stand at the foot of Mount Sinai and say to God, I'll do whatever you say. Nasa v'nishma. We will do and then we'll learn, right? Usually you want to read the fine print. Usually before you sign on the dotted line, you're like, let me see everything that's in the contract. The Jewish people did not do that. They said, Nasa v'nishma. We're going to do whatever you say, and then we'll go learn about it and understand why and all the details of it and all of that, right? So in some ways, we're like, what exactly is the significance of Shavuot? And it's asked, like, we just literally traded one slavery for another, so to speak, right? We just gave up the slavery of Egypt to like slavery to God, except that it was not slavery to God because we were very, very, very willing servants. We were like, as a Jewish people, we said, this is what we want. This is what we are choosing. That whatever you want of us, God, that's what we're going to take on, and that's what we're going to do. Okay. And the other fascinating thing is that the Torah was actually kept, as we just saw this whole story with Moses and Ztiporah, and it was such a big deal that he didn't give his son a circumcision, and the Torah wasn't even given yet. If it's a mitzvah in the Torah, why is he being punished by death, right, for not giving his son a circumcision when the Torah wasn't even given? Okay, so that's also like really fascinating. And so we actually learn that the Torah was like formally given at Mount Sinai, but it was kept from the beginning, right? Abraham, right? That's where we learn about circumcision. Abraham was the first Jew, the first person to on his own recognize monotheism, recognize that there is one God in the world. And because of that, he was Jewish and he took on the Torah and the mitzvot. So Torah was learned. It was prophetically given to certain people and traditionally passed down until it was formally given to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And at that point, the difference is that it became like morally and legally binding. It became like binding, so to speak. It was like obligatory versus just something that people chose before then. Okay, so in text number 1 in the Talmud tells us, since the days of the patriarchs, Torah study has not parted from our ancestors. Okay, and then it gives us sometimes that we knew this. In Egypt, they had Torah academics, as evidenced by the fact that God instructed Moses, go and assemble the Torah scholars of Israel. Abraham was a Torah scholar. He headed a yeshiva. Yaakov, we know, is described as being a Yoshev Ohalim, which is like a dweller of tents, that he would sit and study Torah. And that he had the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. He studied at the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. And according to some traditions, before he went to go stay with Lavan, Yaakov spent 14 years studying in this yeshiva. Okay? And according to the Midrash, Yaakov sent Yehuda, his son, ahead, right, when they were going to go and migrate and go live in Egypt. He sent him ahead to the city of Goshen to establish a yeshiva before his families arrived, which, side point, we just learned this powerful lesson of like establishing Jewish education for your family before you go and move somewhere. So obviously, not only did they study Torah, they also followed the Torah. So, and the Torah actually alludes to this idea in verse in text number 2, where God explained to Yitzchak why he treasured Avram, his father, so much. And in text number 2, this is in Bereshit in Genesis, it is because Avraham obeyed me and kept my charge. It says, and kept my charge, my mitzvot, my statutes, and my Torahs, right? So if you just look at that at face value, it kind of seems almost like just redundant ways of saying he did what I asked. But Rashi tells us, mishmarti, my charge, refers to like extra prohibitions that were put on to safeguard mitzvot. So an example of that would be, oh my gosh, nothing's coming to mind right now. Okay. Like an example of that would be is like we don't write on Shabbat. I'm not going to write with a pen, so I won't even touch a pen. It's called muktzah, because then I might end up writing with the pen, right? So touching the pen was not like the original prohibition, but it's like a secondary prohibition to like safeguard the mitzvah that I don't accidentally go and write with the pen. So that's like an example. So that's what mishmarti refers to. Mitzvotai, my commandments, refers to the civil laws, mishpatim, which are laws that you and I would probably come up with without a Torah. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, say the truth, be honest, those things. Logical commandments. Chukosai refers to my statutes, refers to super rational commandments such as don't eat pork or don't wear shatnez, or that kind of thing. And then Torah-sai, my instructions, refers to the oral laws of Torah, right? So basically from this one verse in Bereshit, we see how Avram kept all these different parts of it, okay? And so what's interesting, right, is we have before the giving of the Torah, which is what we celebrate on Shavuot, we had Torah being studied and being kept. And then the difference is that on Shavuot, on the event of Mount Sinai, right? A lot of fanfare, there was thunder, there was lightning, there was the sound of the shofar. The Jewish people said, Nasa v'nishma, I will take this on, I will do this, and like essentially coming into like a marriage contract with God, right? The Torah and the Luchot are like the marriage contract to say we are making this binding upon us, and actually willingly, right? Willing servants. And so once you look at it that way, yes, we highly value freedom and choice, but we also value duty and responsibility. And I think that that's like really interesting to look at in that sense. And then it kind of begs the question, why would somebody willingly forego their freedom to take on duty and responsibility? But I think all of us can see examples in our own life where we might choose to do that, right? Before getting married, you're free to date whoever you want, to be in relationships with whoever you want, to do whatever you want in a relationship sense. And then when you commit to marriage, you're saying, this is my one and only, right? This is the one person. So you're giving up freedom for the duty and responsibility of being in a committed relationship, but yet we still want that. Because sometimes when we give ourselves boundaries, it also frees us up, right? It frees us up to be fully open to that relationship and have nothing else and no one else in our mind, right? And we could see that with so many different things, is like the freedom you have before you have kids is huge, right? You could just hop in the car, you could just go to the grocery store, you could do so many things, right? And then once you have kids, it might take away some of your freedoms and your choices, and it gives you duty and responsibility. And yet that is such a big value, right? And such a beautiful life, despite the challenge that it could come with, or something like that, right? So that's like something to think about, is like, why under certain circumstances would we willingly forego our freedom? Like, and what is the greater thing that we achieve from that? Yes, setting boundaries gives you freedom. I could not agree more. Sometimes it gives you freedom. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. I tried to find what Torah say was, and I couldn't find it anywhere.
What do you mean, find it? Find it where?
On the internet. What does it mean?
Torah means my Torah, and the word Torah means instruction. So it's my instructions. In this verse, it refers to the oral law. Like mitzvotai referred to the written law, the written commandments, and Torah, in this word Torah refers to the oral law. But the word itself means my Torah, which means my instructions, because Torah means lesson or instruction.
Good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Glad to clarify that. Okay. So this takes us now to practical application number 1, which is right before we dive into the story of Ruth. Do you want to read that for us, Isabel? Do you have the handout with practical application number 1? Oh, you don't even have that on yours. Never mind. I didn't put that on your handout. Okay. But the idea was that in modern society, in Western society, we highly value freedom and choice. And
it's on the handout.
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Shoot. Okay, not shoot. I printed the handout and then I don't see it on there. So I was like, wait, I didn't put it on your handout. So it's not on my handout. Okay, it's on my lesson plan, but on my handout. Okay, so do you want to read that for us, Isabel?
Sure. Practical application number 1. In Western society, freedom is sacred. The Jewish view of freedom is more complex. When God gave us the Torah, it was not that the Torah did not exist beforehand or was not previously heeded, but rather that its laws now became binding. The Jews willingly gave up their freedom to be obligated by the Torah. If we and our actions do not truly matter, then we can do whatever we wish. If we are important, however, then our every action is meaningful and significant. We too sometimes forego our freedom and autonomy for things we value even more. We have the responsibility and ability to use our so-called freedom to do what God wants and to follow in the ways of the Torah. Ask yourself, how am I using my freedom?
Excellent. And I was just looking on the wrong page of the handout, so I do have it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's kind of just something really to think about as we dive into the story of Ruth, because it's fascinating to see what Ruth does with her life and the decisions that she makes, right? So there's different decisions that Ruth has within her life. So okay, so let's just start from the beginning. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at right at the beginning of the story, okay, so Elimelech is very, very wealthy. He's living in the land of Israel, in the city of Beit Lechem, and he decides to, well, the story will be right there in text 4, and this is from Megillat Ruth. So let's see, Robin, since you're a Ztiporah, would you like to read text number 4?
Sure. Text number 4.
Yeah.
Now it came to pass in the days when the judges judged that there was famine in the land, and a man went from Bethlehem of Judah to sojourn in the fields of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons' names were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites from Bethlehem of Judah, and they came to the fields of Moab and remained there.
Okay, so this is like the beginning of the story. Thank you. This is the beginning of the story where Elimelech, he's very wealthy. He's living in Israel, and he decides to leave over there. So, and it's the reason he decided to leave is, okay, there's a famine in the land of Israel, and we're going to see in the next verse why he decides to leave there. And so he flees to this neighboring land of Moab, and that's where he settles with his family, Naomi, and his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Okay, so text number 5, Midrash tells us why he chose to leave. And let's see, Ria, do you want to read that for us? Text number 5.
Elimelech was one of the great people of the land and of the leaders of the generation. When the famine struck, he said to himself, all of Israel will now camp at my doorway, each person with his or her basket begging for alms. So he stood up and fled.
Yeah. So he's a leader, and okay, he's a leader, he's a judge of high standing, he was very, very wealthy. And when famine hits, the reason he decides to leave is because he's scared that everyone's going to come knocking his door down to provide them with food. And so to protect his own wealth, he fled. And this is kind of the action of someone, and just again, like to kind of view this not with judgment, but with learning, right? Someone who just kind of concerns themselves with, let me protect me, myself, and my family foremost, and my obligation to society is secondary. And really, another option he could have had here was to show his own, leadership qualities, his own generosity. And again, I say this not with judgment, but with just like a lesson that we can learn from is, especially because it's not like a crime. Like, yes, he needed to take care of himself and his family, but he also was just he was worried about his wealth and everyone kind of relying on him and needing him. So it didn't end up working out too well for him, because he moves to Moab and he ends up dying there. And his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they both marry Moabite women, but then they also die. They marry Moabite princesses, Orpah and Ruth, and eventually they lose all of their wealth and they die as well after 10 years of living in Moab. So just practical application number 2, again, this could just be like a lesson that we can learn for ourselves from this story. Let's see, Maddie, do you want to read that for us? Practical application number 2. Did I lose you there? Maddie, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, but I don't have the printout in front of me, so I'll just go off the screen to read it.
Oh, okay, no problem.
So hold on, let's see. So practical application number
2.
Okay, number 2. Elimelech, a wealthy leader and judge, left Bethlehem during severe famine because he wanted to protect his wealth. His concern about his and his family's welfare came ahead of his sense of obligation to society. Yes, we need to take care of our families, but we also have an obligation to society and need to think beyond our own immediate surroundings. Ask yourself, what can I do for the welfare of the world at large that won't compromise on the needs of my family?
Okay, thank you.
How timely.
Yes. Absolutely, right? So
Yeah.
this is like a time where we can all just focus inwards and say, I just have to take care of myself and get through this, or like, I can take care of myself and get through this, and what can I do for other people?
Stay at home.
But even with staying at home, there's ways that we can help other people, right?
I believe that is a big way of helping other people, by staying at home and
Right,
doing.
but I'm saying we could even reach out to, like, we can still make phone calls and FaceTime,
Yes.
right? And make sure if like there's someone else that's like lonely or sad, or or not even, just make connections with that, right? And then like my sister in Los Angeles is actually, she's volunteering to like do grocery shopping for like elderly people that are really too scared to leave their homes. And so, right, so it's like she is leaving her home, but for the sake of people who like really want to stay at home, so but they'll get there, or things like that, right? So there's a whole bunch of things. Anyways, so now what happened, right? So Elimelech dies, his two sons die, Machlon and Chilion, right? So now Naomi, his wife, is widowed and bereaved, and she decides there's no point. She hears that there's no more famine in Israel, and she decides it's time to leave Moab, right? I'm going to go back to my land. I'm going to go back to my people that they had left years ago. And Ruth and Orpah, sorry, Ruth is Ruth. I'm going to try to, okay, Ruth and Orpah decide that they're going to go back with Naomi. And Naomi says to them, like, what are you coming with me for, right? Like they're Moabite princesses, right? So they literally are coming from like the lap of luxury, and they have all the fame and prestige and wealth at their fingertips, which number one, they gave up when they, so to speak, when they married Elimelech's sons. Like even that, they already, like Ruth was like very taken by Naomi and Jewish life and Jewish people, and she was like, I don't want, she didn't agree with all the idol worship and the immorality of her people. But if they would go back to the land of Israel, they would really be excommunicated, right? They would no longer be able to be Moabite princesses. And why do the sons die? Okay, I don't know if we can give it a direct correlation. So Naomi asked, why did the sons die? Did Elimelech die because of his escaping from helping his community, right? I don't think that we can make that direct correlation. It's not like, here's your punishment, you should have stayed and helped, therefore you die. But what we could see is like, he could have done this, and this choice that he made didn't work out that well for him. So I don't know what they died of. I can find out if that's something we know. But, okay. So anyways, so Naomi's saying, don't come back with me. Like, I'm poor, I'm penniless, I have nothing. I don't even know how I'm going to be treated, right? Because like we kind of abandoned our people 10 years ago, and stay here. Like, go back to your families, go back, be your Moabite princess. There's no reason for you to come with me. And initially they both like really insisted, but then Orpah goes back and Ruth sticks with Naomi. And we can see this like exchange between them, between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in text number 6. Kind of long. Let's see, who would like to read that for us? Anne, do you want to read that for us? Anne Molson? Let's see, I'm unmuting you if I can, if this will let me. I think you might have to unmute yourself.
Here you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I did.
Okay. Do you want to read?
And are you okay?
Yeah. Do you want to read text number 6 for us?
And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each woman to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the deceased and with me. May the Lord grant you that you find rest, each woman in her husband's house. And she kissed them, and they raised their voices and wept. And they said to her, No, but we will return with you to your people. I can't see with these glasses. And Naomi said, Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, and they should be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I have become too old to marry, that I should say that I have hope. Even if I had a husband tonight, and even if I had borne sons, would you wait for them until they grew up? Would you shut yourselves off for them and not marry? No, my daughters, for it is much more bitter for me than you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. And they raised their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth cleaved to her. Cleave to her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like hung on to her.
What is it? Okay.
Clung to her, maybe that was the better word.
Is that okay? And she said, lo, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her God. Return after your sister-in-law. And Ruth said, do not entreat me to leave you, to return from following you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So may the Lord do to me, and so many, he continue, if anything but death separate me and you. And she saw that she was determined to go with her, so she stopped speaking to her. And they both went on until they arrived to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they arrived to Bethlehem that the entire city was astir on their account. And they said, is this Naomi?
Okay, thank you. All right, I think that's super powerful exchange. Just one thing I want to bring out. Okay, so you could see here that Orpah eventually acquiesced and went back. And we're not, that doesn't even like beg a question, because of course, like, right? Like you're choosing between, you might go, you're going to be penniless, face rejection, your husband died, like there's nothing there for you. Naomi has nothing to promise them, right? So like, we're not really questioning why she would go back. But Ruth, you could see how strongly she was like, I don't care. I don't care about what's here for me in Moab. I want this life. I want to follow Torah. I want your God. I want to be with you. I want to be with your people. And really fascinating here also where she says, where you die, I will die. This is also kind of like a source for Jewish burial. She's saying like, I want to be buried in the Jewish way, the same way you will be, right? Just all of this is like it's very, very, I think, powerful words. You can see like the emotion in Ruth when she's saying to Naomi, like, there's nothing back there for me. Even though Naomi's trying to convince her, like, there's nothing here for you. She's like, no, this is my religion. This is my Torah. These are my people. This is who I want to be with. And I think that's really fascinating. So I want to respect your time. And okay, Tessa pointed out, Orpah is the great-great-grandmother of Goliath, and Ruth, the great-great-grandmother of David. Isn't that fascinating? I think it's great-great-grandma. I think it's one, whatever, side point. Great-grandmother? Yeah, great-grandmother, sorry. Yeah, so I think this is, because I want to respect everyone's time also, and since it's about to be 2:30, we'll just continue Ruth next time, but I will also prepare another woman to talk about so that we can finish this class, but also hopefully cover another one. So that will be next Tuesday at this time. And this Friday, I'm doing kugel making. You guys, I'm going to make potato kugel and I'm going to make challah kugel. So if you want to watch that live, you totally can. And just so you know, all of the stuff that I do live is jewishnovato.com/Adina. So very simple that you can just always do the link that way instead of trying to find the Zoom links. And anything that Rabbi Landa does live is going to be jewishnovato.com/Zoom. So you can join us that way. So before I end, does anyone have any specific questions on today? Thank you, Maddie. It was so wonderful to see everyone and such a beautiful room of ladies, Zoom room of ladies. So thank you.
I have a question. Does your kugel taste like sawdust or is it delicious?
What do you think, Jolie?
I think it's delicious, but raise your hand if you've ever tasted kugel that tastes like sawdust.
But I'm going to teach you how to make kugel that does not. Which one do you think is going to taste like sawdust? The potato one or the...
Yeah, the potato one, yeah.
Potato one? Oh my gosh, I love my potato kugel.
All right, good. The gauntlet is thrown.
All right. If you want, it's a different kind of flavor. A different flavor of Zoom. Like I'm saying, this is Torah and Tea. That will be just some potato kugel and challah kugel making. That's going to be at Friday at 12, I believe. But otherwise, I will see you back here next week at 1 o'clock for Torah and Tea. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, dear.